Hello. How fun is this to be able to spend time together here on the You've Got Nurse Series podcast? This is a place to explore practical ways to improve our health, which heightens our life experience. I invite you to join in with an open heart and an open mind to receive our guest today. Oh my gosh, I am just so enthused to introduce you to Diana Feinstein today. Oh my gosh, Diana, you as the founder of Max Pact Health, I want you to further introduce yourself and tell us how you got to where you are today and what lights you up.
Oh, I love these questions, Catherine. I love this. Right. So my name is Diana Feinstein, and I'm a transformation specialist. I help busy, high-achieving professionals lose weight, tone up, and burn belly fat in just 30 minutes every day, specifically in menopause. And so how did I come across to this? I found Max Pact Health when I was 5. So I was watching television with my parents, right? I'm a first-generation Filipino-American. And I saw Mother Teresa of Calcutta on the TV. And I told my father, I'm going to go to her monastery because she's accepting nuns at the age of 14. I'm so adamant. So I'm so curious and infatuated with this woman. My father turned to me and goes, doctor, lawyer, engineer, failure. And that stuck with me so viscerally. And that was just kind of like that undercurrent. And it was in that moment that my high achiever was born, masterfully cultivated, and given like tons of fertilizer. And so, we kind of like walk through life checking off all the boxes, doing all the things. And, I found myself, on Wall Street because I didn't become doctor, lawyer, engineer, failure. So that was kind of like the runner-up. And so then you kind of keep doing all the things. So I worked for a number of blue chip companies in a number of different capacities. And I remember very vividly, after I'd moved from New York City into the suburbs, sitting with a glass of Bordeaux and goldfish on the floor of my suburban house, wondering like how I got there. And I asked myself in that dark moment, is this really all that there is? And, you continue just to start to normalize this like feeling of frustration. And then I eventually went numb, and I stayed numb for like a number of years. And, we all have this coping mechanism, just kind of scrolling through the internet, right, to stay zoned out. And there was something that caught my eye about this Facebook post about a gym. It was looking for 10 women to, transform their bodies. So there was this thing that like drove me to just stalk whoever posted this. I was like, they're talking to me, right? They're talking to me. And that set off a whirlwind of just coming back to myself, right? The only goal that I had was to put on my wedding ring. That was it. And I went down the rabbit hole of total body transformation and, understanding what it meant to, eat right and work out. And there was that part of me that was like that 5-year-old kid that was like, hey, I'm put on this earth to help people that couldn't help themselves, right? So, fast forward, I went back, into finance, all the while kind of working part-time in like, fitness and nutrition coaching. And what really fascinated me was pattern recognition, right? So when I was in finance, I was responsible for actually building models, right? So let's quantify mindfulness for a second. We have 24 hours in a day. That's 86,400 seconds. 86,400 moments, opportunities to become mindful. Average attention span right now is about 7 seconds. And so I went deep down into the science and the art of behavior change, right? You know, when you watch Netflix, it's like one episode and that one episode becomes 5. That's actually a science behind that. How do they get you to get onto the platform and to stand to that platform? It's called a hook. And so I thought to myself, well, what if we actually did that for health? Right. And it's about making things dopamine worthy. How do you get that dopamine hit at the end of a behavior loop, right? And the behavior loop we're defining as anchor behavior and positive reinforcement. So when I started looking at seeing attention as like harnessing attention and really getting curious about why people did the things that they did, what is the equivalent? Like, what are the hygiene practices for that individual, not a population, but for that individual that are the equivalent of like brushing their teeth, right? You brush your teeth 2 minutes in the morning and 2 minutes at night. So you're telling me in 4 minutes, I can decrease my risk of cavities by 95%. Who knew? Right? So like, what are the hygiene practices that we as individuals, given our baseline of where we are in our life, 30s, 40s, and 50s, right? I specifically work with people in midlife, given kind of like what demands that they have in their life, how do we start to create margin around the edges? Right? How do we create that margin? Not just to, what are these like low risk situations where we can actually start to meet our needs to create that dopamine hit? The hardest part is actually getting started. So what I invite people to look at is, hey, I have this intention. I read all the books. I do all the blogs. I'm deep in it with like the New York Times wellness section, right? But like, what is in that gap analysis between the New York Times, health section and like actual execution, right? What is in that gap? And so like, I get deep into that gap with people. And that's honestly like what drives me every single day.
Funny. I love that you put your hand up and your hand went up, right?
Yeah.
It's like over here. But I love the point about how many moments there are in a day, right? Because, oh my gosh, talk about all those opportunities, right?
Right.
Because the only power is in the present moment.
So we have.
That's right. One moment,
Right.
one moment to one moment to one moment, right? So
That's
I
right.
love talking about that because that's where the power is, and that's what gives you the opportunity to make a choice. And all of this is all about choice, right?
That's right.
One,
That's right.
if we don't make the choice, someone else is going to influence us to be living their choice, not our choice.
That's right. I love the way Carl Jung puts it, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is like our power to choose. And, what I love holding space for people is recognizing that there is a difference between reactivity and responsiveness.
No question.
And, we fall to the level of our habits, like our thought patterns. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. Fear of failure, fear of success, right? That we fall to that level like 95% of the time. And so when we don't like the output in our lives, well, do we change the inputs? Do we change the model? Do we change both? And how do we actually do it in a leveraged way that's actually going to move the needle? Right? And what are people ready, willing, and able to do? There's so many people in our industry, Catherine, that's like, it's about mindset. It's about exercise. It's about nutrition. It's about, it's about all the things. But if we, instead of looking at it from like a population perspective, people need mindset, people need nutrition, people need exercise. Like what is that bespoke model look like for that individual person? Right? In that moment of time, what is the most leveraged thing that they can do in the margins of their life to produce leveraged results so that they can actually get that dopamine hit and opening up that curiosity and being like, well, what if I could do more of this? Would you be willing? And what would that look like?
Well, and I love that you talk about curiosity, because I think that curiosity is key to not only progress, but opening ourselves up to the adventure of living. Right? Yeah.
That's right.
I remember
That's right.
my friend Penny, who lived to be 100, right? And when she was asked, what was the biggest contributing factor of her longevity, and she said, being curious, right? And it makes a huge difference. And I
Yeah.
like to work with people, in some arenas, it's referred to as the witness or
Yeah.
yourself from the outside. And I decided quite some time ago to make a beautiful relationship with my curious observer, right?
I love that.
It takes the sting of the judgment out, right?
Yeah.
And when you're curious, there's also a sense of mischief there, right?
I love that.
A little bit more fun. And it's just like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking that caused me to say that or do that or whatnot, right?
Yeah.
And you get a lot of information in a very short period of time. And it isn't
Right.
something that you have to spend hours or weeks or months, mulling over. And it's just like, oh, all right, well, that didn't work out very well. So I see where I can make a little change.
Right. It's not happening to me, it's happening for me.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And I love also what you were talking about, what works for that individual, because each of us has had our own individual life experience because we have our own perception, we have our own perspective, we have our own set of circumstances that we grew up in. And that, there's no getting around it. That influences
Right.
how we operate. And
Right.
I believe when people understand the basics of how they actually operate, then they have a much better chance of making changes for themselves that are lasting and effective.
I just want to touch upon what you said, people's operating system, right? I think when people see it as a system, as opposed to like a defect,
Yeah.
right? It starts to melt that shame, right? Brene Brown, I love how she says like shame dies in like safe spaces, right? Shame dies in the light.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so when we don't make it subjective, we make it actually objective, right? This is my operating system. This is what it's producing. Do I like the outcome? As opposed to, is there something wrong with me? I need to fix me, right? What do I need to build versus like what void do I have to fill? It's a completely different angle, right? And from that angle, we can produce an entirely different energy set, right? There's a very different energy of like running towards something versus running away from something. Very different energy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you think about the enthusiasm, typically of moving forward, right?
Right.
And when you think about getting away from something, there's a real fear factor there in
Yeah.
most situations, right?
Right.
And it's totally different. And the chemical cocktail reactions in your body in response to those, to either the enthusiasm or the fear, are totally
Right.
different, right?
Yeah.
And we are just not meant to be running on stress cocktails our whole life. And many people are doing that. And it's, my heart just goes out to these folks because I think that in many cases, they don't realize the damage that's being done to the operating system, right?
Right. Yeah. Damage to the operating system. I love this languaging. I love this.
Well, it does make a difference because, as you say, it takes the shame out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, if your automobile isn't running properly, you take it to the mechanic, and the mechanic
Right.
says, "No, something's a little out of whack here," and you get it fixed, and it's just like, "Oh my gosh!" And you drive back off the lot, and everything's good to go. It's kind of the same thing. We have an opportunity to make adjustments for ourselves and how we work.
Yeah, it's, I think we've normalized, there's so much conditioning about how to manage care. Like we take better care of our computer and our cars and our wardrobes and our purses. And it's like our greatest asset, our health and ourselves. We've normalized, society's normalized, like we can fix this with, my fitness pal and Noom, right? And like, I just, let me just medicate this, right? So it's about, you know, challenging the conversation about if we were to move this away from being pharmacentric and actually move this towards being human centric, right? Like, what would that conversation look like? And, right? And what are the systemic risks that we need to, like, as a society look at? And if they cannot be supported by those things in place, like what are the tables that we actually need to start to create so that we can get the support that we're looking for?
I do think it's important to think about those things because I know when I work with people, it's very much about East meets West. There are good things in both models because, being centered on health, right, and self-care, it's highly important to understand that there are some things in the Western model and in the pharmaceutical world that you can partner with, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a life sentence. If you fall and break your ankle, you're going to need a walking boot or a cast or something for a short period of time, but that doesn't mean you have to have it the rest of your life. And some of these pharmaceutical things are highly useful while you're getting your operating system, right, on an energetic level, and getting your energy into a working habit, as you were talking about, being able to work with the energy that we have, right? Because we don't breathe ourselves. We do not make our hearts beat on our own. We are all part of what I call the universal soup, right?
Universal soup. Tell me more about the universal soup. Tell me more about that.
We're all part of this universal information field, right? We're electromagnetic beings. And we understand that every thought and every emotion and every action has an energetic value to it. And, right? And you're electromagnetic. And the heart-brain coherence is a real thing. And when your thoughts are electric and your heart, your emotion is magnetic. And this is what we're communicating all the time. What are you broadcasting? Right?
Right.
We are broadcasting something all the time. And it's just so interesting to me that some folks, I think, when they're screaming and yelling and I know, right? They may think they're all revved up, but that's such a low level energy, right? That they're just spewing, and that's what they're broadcasting. And then they wonder why they're not accomplishing what it is they want to accomplish.
Yeah.
And it takes some getting used to think of ourselves on an energetic level. Though I believe that when we take into account that we are these electromagnetic beings and how we work with our energy matters, it takes some of the emotion out of it. And when you look at the research on emotion, it's the lifespan of an emotion is only up to about 2 minutes.
Right.
And it's that negative default bias, right? That we have to overcome. And it's logistics, and it doesn't have anything to do with something being wrong with us, that we're not good enough, that going back to that self-image, that is, I mean, yes, are there things that we can do better? Of course.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that just because we haven't been exposed to it, that it's not actually a working thing, right?
Right. And, and to that point, like there is the exposure, right? So there's like that insight, right? And so how can people move from like that insight how can they actually move that into like a transformation, right? How do we go from like insight to execution, right? Like what's in that gap analysis?
Mhm.
And again, to take out that sting of like, I'm not good enough, right? What if we saw this as almost like frustration tolerance, right? Like my frustration is here and like my skill set to deal with that frustration is down here.
Mhm.
Right. So, yes, keep the frustration here, but like, what if we actually built up skill sets, right? To actually like help meet that like co-regulation piece or that frustration. And, I think that it's important for people to experience like what that shift actually feels like,
Mhm.
right? So that they can begin that like paradigm shift. There's like the intellect. Okay, I read the book. I've read the book and I know the book, but it's so different when we go from that like intellectual mastery to that emotional congruency. Like, what does that actual movement along that look like? And I really do believe that we are the average of like the 5 people that we spend the most time with, right? So if we are surrounding ourselves with experiences and opportunities to actually live and experience different, then it's going to be so much easier to actually, actually take these practices as part of our own, because it's like we are actually bathing in this like paradigm shift.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, okay, like I see it, I'm continually exposed to it. Let me try this for myself. Let me experience this for myself. And from experience, that's when our behaviors start to change,
Mhm.
right? Because like we have an underlying belief that just needs a little bit more fertilizer. We just need to fertilize the right thoughts and experiences.
And also bringing back to the mindfulness piece of it.
Yeah.
And it's important that we evaluate how we're using our time, right?
Yeah.
And also, am I in that environment
Right.
supporting me? Right.
Right.
And am I feeling good about supporting the people in my environment that I have chosen
Right.
to put myself in? Right.
Right.
And sometimes we have to make changes. Uh,
Right.
and when you think about the self-care piece of this, you wouldn't put your child in a situation that was not safe, but we do that for ourselves quite frequently, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
emotional safety is just as important as physical safety, right? And many people are working and living in environments where they really don't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable. They don't feel that they're able
Right.
to be themselves. And so then we get into this, well, who am I?
Right.
Right?
Right. Right.
And I think it's imperative to absolutely evaluate, what am I thinking? What am I doing? What am I feeling? Who am I with?
Right.
What am I eating? Right? What am
Right.
It all comes down to, I believe, very much about, what we choose to think dictates how we feel and how we act,
Right.
and who we, make contact with, who we choose to
Right.
remain in an environment with. And we don't have to be self accusatory
Right.
in our evaluation.
Right. And I want to touch on something you said so beautifully. It's what we choose. And, for a lot of my clients that I work with, they don't realize that they actually have a choice,
Hmm.
or they don't slow down enough, or it feels too scary to slow down to realize that they actually have a choice. Right. So yeah, just knowing that you have a choice is huge.
I think part of self care is giving yourself the time
Right.
to evaluate.
Right.
When you were talking about sitting on the floor and
Right.
how did I get here? Right?
Right.
Oh my gosh, we've all had these moments, right? It's just like,
Right.
what in the world was I thinking?
Right.
It's been 10 years and how did I get here?
Right. Is this all there is? And
In fact, yeah. I was in a marriage that was breaking up, and I just said, there is just so much more to my life than helping you live yours.
Oh, I love that.
And that wasn't anything that I had planned to say, but it was just like, oh my gosh, it felt so right. Because we each are a gift, and we have gifts.
Right. Right.
And when we don't honor our own gifts, life isn't very much fun.
Yeah. Who are we doing it for in the end?
Mhm.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It's so
I love this conversation, Catherine. Thank you so much for having me as a guest. This is amazing.
well. We always have great conversations, and we'll have to have another one sometime. So before we head out for today, though, because I believe it's imperative for people to really think about what they do for their own self-care, because I believe that self-care is a bit different than the commercialized version of self-care. And so, I mean, for myself, one of the main things that I do for myself is every morning I meditate. And I want to feel calm. I want to feel connected to this energy that I am a part of. And I want to be feeling good with me before I step out. Because if I'm not feeling good with me, how am I going to feel good in my interaction with anybody else, right?
That's right. That's right.
That's one of the main things that I do. What do you do?
I love walking.
Mhm.
My big thing is walking uninterrupted without listening to the podcast, without listening to the music, without doing all the things, and just walking slowly, right? Just like being with myself. And, I'm part of this coaching program, and the facilitator said, can you think about the time when you felt most alive, right? Because in that moment when you felt most alive, it's actually where your core value is. And, for me, my core values are, space, deep focus, feeling supported, right? And I feel all those things when I'm with myself walking outside in the trees. So that's the way that I connect to myself every morning.
Oh, it's beautiful because we're all a part of nature. Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right.
It's so beautiful. So, and also before we go, I want to know what one of your latest projects is and how people can find you.
So I am looking for founding members for the Max Pax Health inaugural midwifing menopause incubator. So, menopause is one of the most common experiences for women, right there with adolescence. And I'm really committed to actually removing the stigma of what moving through menopause actually looks like. Right. So there are a number of inherent risks in our managed care space of how menopause is actually managed. So along with, support systems like HRT, there are a number of lifestyle practices that, need to be explored. Right. So going back to the toothbrushing analogy, right? Like, what are like the 2 minutes menopause hygiene practices that women need to just start onboarding into their life? Like, I really, encourage people to think about menopause as like a need for succession planning. So with like estrogen leaving, right, that stress buffer leaving, that cardiovascular stress, that buffer is leaving, like what are the practices that actually need to be onboarded, right? So, the brain fog, the night sweats, the vaginal dryness, the fatigue, the anxiety, all of these things, they just get amplified because estrogen is leaving. So like, what are the practices that women can do, outside of direct medical intervention that could make the world of a difference. So what if menopause were actually an invitation for higher discernment? What would that look like? Right. And it's made a world of a difference for me and like for my clients. And, I really want to bring this work out into the world for a bigger audience. So people can find me at my website, www.maxpacthealth.com. That's MAXPACT health.com.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Beautiful. And what social media platforms are you on?
So I'm on LinkedIn at Diana J. Feinstein, and as well as Instagram, MaxPact Health, and I'll drop them in the show notes.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. Diana, thank you so much for being with us today. Oh my gosh, this is fabulous.
Thank you so much for having me, Catherine.
Thank you so much for joining in today on the You've Got Nurse Series podcast. I appreciate your time, as our time is our most precious commodity. We never get the time back. Using our time intentionally and with purpose makes a difference. Kindly like and share if you find this content helpful. I invite you to explore a bit more of the work, which you can find on my websites of you'vegotnurse.org and theartofselfcraftsmanship.org. It will be my pleasure to hear from you with any questions you may have. Take good care of you and your ultimate mind diet in the meantime.